Hey, what is up guys, JayTX here. Today I'm going to be going over my build plans for the PoE 2 Early Access starting in approximately 12 hours from now. You probably know me as the Bleed Bow guy from all my PoE 1 content, and I'm trying to take that tradition into Path of Exile 2, seeing if we can start up with a Bleed Crossbow or Bleed Bow build. It's been confirmed that Bleed's still in the game, obviously in Path of Exile 2, and during the Early Access, during some of the testing, people were saying Bleed was actually quite strong, that it had to be nerfed a couple times by GGG. I have high expectations for that Bleed can still be very strong in Path of Exile 2. In the early access, we don't have all the classes unlocked yet. I suspect that the best class will probably still be Gladiator or Slayer, but they're not available as the Duelist is not available yet. In this case, the two classes that I see that have the highest potential in the early access would be first the Witch Hunter and second the Blood Mage. So I'll quickly talk about the Witch Hunter, which is probably the class I will be starting, and the order of ascendancies that I'd probably go on this class on day one. Obviously, though, this is still very, very early and everything's subject to change, but just based off the initial information that we've been given, I've tried to cook up a little bit of a build template slash guide that you guys can follow if you are interested in starting Bleed Bow. Obviously, I'll be streaming this on my Twitch channel at JayTX, so you guys can kind of check in on how the build's doing. If it's awful, then you'll see it too. Hopefully it's not too bad, and hopefully we can make it work. The Witch Hunter has some pretty interesting ascendancy synergies with becoming a boss killer, with how the concentration and the decimating strike works. Some of the things won't work really well with Bleed Bow because we're not a really hit-based build. We're going for dots, right? So stuff like Witchbane and No Mercy, that's going to be pretty hard to take advantage of because we don't really care about having a really high hit. We only care about doing the dot portion of our damage. So noting that, the most likely ascendancy nodes we'll be taking would be Zealous Inquisition, number 8, so chance to explode, amazing. Doubled against undead and demons, so that's going to be probably really nice for just mapping and clearing in general. Probably one of the first nodes we'll be taking during the act, so we can start clearing things really quickly. The second and third nodes we'll be taking is Pitiless Killer and Judge, Jury, and Executioner, so we get Culling Strike and Decimating Strike respectively. These have some interesting synergies. I think it'll be pretty interesting to play around because there are so many bosses to kind of kill throughout the acts, and also encountering bosses seems to be a big aspect of the Path of Exile 2 campaign. So having these nodes early will make our lives a little bit easier, at least for some of the phases that we can kind of chunk the boss down, either at the start and at the end. Maybe it's not as good as you get into maps, we're not sure yet, but I think 2 and 3 seem to be the logical next choices. So Pitiless Killer and Judge, Jury, and Executioner. And then our final one, take Weapon Master. I think Weapon Master has really high potential for us to kind of swap between different weapons, because I think that's really what they're trying to push. So potentially you could have a crossbow and a regular bow, and you swap between them, and having those extra passive points allow you to be more flexible in how you build out your weapon. If you weren't taking Weapon Master and you were taking Pitiless Killer, Judge, Jury, Executioner, you could go for Obsessive Ritual. So this is number 6 and 7. So you take Obsessive Rituals, and then you take Ceremonial Ablution. So this just gives you a massive sorcery reward, kind of similar to how the Elementalist Aegis works right now, I believe. It just blocks a big portion of your damage while sacrificing your armor and evasion rating for it. I think this is a really good defensive ascendancy node. Potentially I could see myself picking this up if things get very hairy in higher tier content, or if things are very rippy. I could potentially respec into a more defensive ascendancy node. But early on, I think I'll be sticking with the pure damage route, and then once we start figuring out, how brutal some of the campaign is, then we'll probably be adjusting our ascendancy. But those are the ascendancy plans for the Witch Hunter. I'll talk about the Blood Mage as well. You can't really talk about Bleed without talking about the Blood Mage itself. The main reason is because the ascendancy node Blood Barbs is pretty interesting. Now the note says here, gain 10% of damage is extra physical damage. So all of your damage is added up, and you get an extra 10% as physical damage, which should be pretty insane. And elemental damage also contributes to bleeding magnitude. This is actually really, really interesting because generally bleeding in Path of Exile 1 is only relevant to the physical damage of the hit. So elemental damage didn't really interact with bleed in Path of Exile 1. This allows for interesting potential in PoE 2 because there's a lot more sources of elemental damage in the game than pure physical damage. So this could be a way that you could scale a build using elemental damage, and then really ramping up your bleed damage by scaling elemental damage. The new term here is magnitude. This wasn't in Path of Exile 1, and I believe what magnitude means is essentially the effect of your bleed, and I'm sure magnitude probably means the effect of the element for other things. Having a higher magnitude just means you're going to be applying a higher ailment on an enemy. Now we have the bleeding definition here in Path of Exile 2, so bleeding is still an ailment, physical damage over time, 5 seconds by default. It bypasses energy shield. If you are playing bleed at all, aggravate is the key to dealing insane damage. By default, if a target isn't moving with bleeding, then they're taking the base damage. If they do start moving, then they start taking more damage. In this case, they take an extra 100% damage if the target is moving, so pretty much double damage. Or you can aggravate the bleed, so even if they're not moving, they still take double damage from bleed. So aggravating targets with bleed is very, very important. So back to the Blood Mage Ascendancy. If you were to try Blood Mage, you have to take number 1, obviously, which is Sanguimancy. So skills get a base life cost equal to base mana cost. Then you would go for Blood Barbs to allow yourself to do extra physical damage. After that, you've got a couple of choices here. I believe some of the really good choices here would be stuff like Grasping Wounds. This literally works the same as how Progenesis works now. So a quarter of the damage that you take is prevented, and then it's distributed over 4 seconds instead. It's really, really good for making you tanky. The other one is Crimson Power, so gain energy shield from equipped body armor as extra maximum life. Path of XL1, you can get a lot more energy shield on a piece of armor than you can life. So this could be a really powerful way of scaling a huge amount of life by going for energy shield on your armor. These 2 nodes are pretty damn good for tanking your character up. We don't care too much about the critical damage part of bleed. Potentially, if there's perfect agony or some way of scaling crit into dot multi, potentially that could be interesting. But Gore Spike and Sunder the Flesh, that's not something we're too interested in as a bleed bow build. Vitality Siphon, spell damage each life, not something we're interested in either. Potentially, the other one is Open Sores. I haven't really seen a good curse yet for Bleed Bow. So I think the way you would go it is Sanguimancy, Blood Barbs, Grasping Wounds, and Crimson Power if you wanted to play Bleed Bow on a Blood Mage. I'll quickly talk about some of the skills as well that are available that we know so far in the early access. So you can see here we have the tried and true Rain of Arrows. Obviously, this is one of my favorite skills of all time, especially for when I was leveling Bleed a couple leagues ago until Split Arrow kind of became the king of clear. Rain of Arrows always has a special place in my heart for how nice it is to play. And for the other gems that have been confirmed so far, so we have Brutality, which kind of functions the same way, more damage, more physical damage, you deal no chaos, no elemental. Deep Cut, more effective bleeding from supported skills, less damage with hits. This seems like a pretty damn powerful support gem. Essentially, I would assume it doubles the effect of bleed once you level it up to 20, and it reduces the hit damage on hit damage of your bleed, which is pretty normal in DOT-based builds. Chain, this is relevant if you're using something that's not Rain of Arrows. I thought I'd just keep it in here to let people know that Chain still exists as a support link for clearing. If Split Arrow is still in the game, then Chain is your best friend here. And then Bleed Chance. Getting Bleed Chance will be the main name of the game for a Bleed Bow build, making sure you cap out your chance to 100% so you're not losing any damage on missed hits. Other skills that I've seen that could be pretty decent is High Velocity Round. So this is a really, really high hitting skill. Potentially this could be your single target initiator for a fight, and then you have your clear skill like Rain of Arrows or Split Arrow. How Path of Exile 2 works is you can only have 1 support gem of each kind. So if you want this to be your single target, then you would put all your single target gems here, so probably Brutality, Deep Cuts, Bleed Chance potentially, and then your clear skill like Rain of Arrows would be your utility links. As I mentioned before, Aggravate is very, very important for bleed, and we have a support gem called Rupture. Supported skills aggravate bleeding on hitting heavy stunned enemies. We're going to have to hit an enemy with a stun, and then this support gem aggravates the bleed on enemies. If you aggravate a bleed, it aggravates all the bleeds on the target, so it doesn't just aggravate the bleed of the skill it's linked to. You aggravate everything on it. So ideally, you want to hit it with a really high bleed, and then you aggravate it with this gem here. So we've linked this to Flash Grenade Launcher. So this is a 1000% more stun build-up. Rupture combos with that pretty nicely on hitting heavy stunned enemies. So this could be like your utilities. So the combo would be you hit an enemy with your high velocity rounds or your single target skill, and then you use your Flash Grenade Launcher to stun them and then to aggravate the bleeds on them. I can see that being a reliable way of aggravating bleeds on an enemy. I'm sure there's other ways that will exist in the tree or other gear, but that's one of the better ways to do it now with the information we know. I've also included Tornado Shot here as another potential clear skill or a skill for us to use with a bow. Obviously, we'll have to see what skills kind of reign supreme after the first day. We'll test out all of the different bow skills and see which feels really good for Bleed Bow. These are just the initial thoughts that I have for some of the gems, and the good news is it seems like we still have a lot of the Bleed Bow support gems in the game, so we're looking pretty good for the league start. Jumping into the skill tree now, you'll be pleased to note that there are still bleed nodes on the tree. Thank God. They seem to be in the starting area for the Witch Hunter, which seems to be down to the bottom of the tree. So we have nodes like Bloodletting and If you look on the side here, bleeding out, we don't care too much about a total bleeding because I don't think we'll be empowering attacks. If you were interested in the skill tree, you're probably pathing down towards these notables first, then also looking for crossbow and bow nodes that give you generic damage on the way down in the tree. Also, you can pick up armor and evasion rating because it can combo pretty well with the mercenary ascendancy that gives the sorcery ward. Also, notably, we want to be pathing towards Resolute technique. We don't care about crit at all on the build, so this is really good for capping out our accuracy and not having to make us worry about accuracy. So this is also a very important note for us to take, and it hasn't changed from Path of Exile 1. This is the bread and butter of bleed bow builds, and this is a note that you'll definitely want to take early on. Your tree probably go down and then to the left, and then maybe a little bit down towards the bottom. Obviously, this tree is still very early. It could be changed prior to early access. We have no idea what it's going to look like, but the idea is we do want to take the bleed nodes and we want to take Resolute technique. As for gearing, the most important thing back in Path of Exile 1 was getting a really high roll physical damage on your weapon. So in this case, this would be your bow / your crossbow. I imagine this would be the same. You're looking for as high as possible physical roll on your bow as possible. And you want to try to upgrade that as constantly as you go through the acts. Other than that, you're probably looking for armor with generic life, resistances. There's nothing that's too specific that we're looking out for. Mainly just looking out for a good physical damage bow and maybe a good quiver with physical damage on that as well. In terms of unique items, I'm sure there's a really cool early game unique items that we have yet to see. I'd be on the lookout for anything that's bleed related, anything that relates to aggravating bleeds, anything that essentially will allow us to do more damage over time or give us a more consistent chance to bleed would be really strong for us. Potentially anything like hemophilia would give us bleed pops. That would be amazing if those are still in the game. Later on, you're probably looking for your chest piece, which could be like a defensive piece of armor. We'll have to see what's in the game at the moment, but keep an eye out for those early uniques that could really amp the power of your build. One cool announcement at the very end is I have partnered up with Mobalytics, as have a lot of other PoE streamers, to bring guides into the game. I imagine once they have their site online, you can start seeing guide planners and build planners. Path of Building won't be available at least for the first few weeks of the game, so this is probably where you want to go if you want to see how we're doing different builds. So our skill tree, our gem links, our gearing. Mobalytics will have their own little build planner, so you can have a look at that if you're interested in actually having a written version of the build when I release certain guide videos in the future. You can see a lot of big PoE content creators like Jung, Ben, Localhole, they're all on here. And look at me down here, JayTX. I've snuck my way in, so I'm also a partner there with Mobalytics. Other than that, guys, I hope you guys are really excited for the Path of Exile 2 early access launch. I'll be streaming the start on Twitch at JayTX if you guys wanted to follow along and see how I'm doing with the build. If you have any questions of your own about Path of Exile 2 or anything related to Bleed Bow, I generally have a good understanding of most things related to that, so hopefully I can help you with that. Hope you guys have a really good start to Path of Exile 2. I'm really excited to log in, and I know this is going to be an amazing game already, so hopefully everyone has a good time, and hopefully not too many server issues tomorrow. I know there's a lot of people that are going to be joining on, so let's pray that grinding your game servers are able to hold on. As always, guys, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.